This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by Globalspeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of Globalspeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Dwight, welcome to Tag Radio.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Well, I'll tell you, I can't imagine another group that's on the front line any more than North Highland. I know you guys have been around for a long time and been providing incredible insight over a lot of innovation and obviously the rapid changes that have been going on in technology. You got to be focused in terms of what's happening now, obviously. For the last couple of years, it's all been about digital transformation. Obviously, it's still a challenge. So let's go into a little bit about that, if you mind, Dwight. Let's start out with, I guess probably a fundamental question would be, boy, the CIO has taken it really, seemingly every day almost. It seems another responsibility or another task it's kind of laid at their desk. Maybe let's go into, say, the challenges there. Let's start with the key challenges with facing the CIO.
Yeah, we see two, and it's funny, some old challenges are new again, might be the way to look at this, but we see two fundamentally. And by the way, this is two in a fairly long list, so I could spend all day talking about the challenges, but it's really two things. How to be really the Chief Digital Transformation Officer, and how to deal with this onslaught of AI and cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to go ahead and unpack those in a little more detail for you?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we wrote a piece about this. To a certain extent, over the last, call it, really 5 to 10 years, as digital has really hammered into the corporate psyche, we've actually seen this drive towards making the CMO, the Chief Digital Officer, or a Chief Digital Officer coming on board. But we believe that the CIO should be particularly well suited to sit in that role because they are, after all, assumably the chief technologist for the firm. They also should have a great understanding of how the firm operates. And ultimately, when it's done outside of IT is such a major enabling force for the digital transformation, these initiatives always fail. So the key for the CIO to be the Chief Digital Transformation Officer, though, is to truly be aligned with the C-level about what digital means for the company, how it can benefit the company, and how it can drive it forward. So on the AI and cognitive front, I know that there is always a brand new hot technology that everybody says is going to change the world. We've seen it in almost every technological innovation, these overblown, really aggressive claims. The difference between AI, or at least nascent AI, cognitive services, intelligent automation, whatever acronym you care to use here, and what we've seen before, this is the first technology curve that's hitting on some converging trends we've been seeing over time. Cheaper computing power, better collection of data, better ability to predict against that data. And those three converging factors are actually now allowing the wholesale replacement in human beings in some rather unexpected ways. So that's why we believe these are the two key challenges.
You know, it's kind of interesting is I would think that one of the challenges has to be the understanding of where management is headed as far as their heads are concerned, and where technology is headed, and the capabilities of being able to accomplish what management thinks they can do. I mean, how realistic is it for the CIO or the CMO, depending on, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I know in my experience, a lot of times it's a title that might be different, but the reality of it is it's still basically that CIO or CTO kind of doing all of that heavy lifting. Because, I mean, one of the things I'm fascinated about is how they implement a project when they've got 6 other projects yet to implement. And obviously they've got to do all of the proposals and get all the funding and visit all the vendors. And, I mean, the time consumption of just being able to manage that kind of financial responsibility is one thing. But let's go back to the question about, is there a challenge for the CIO to kind of understand kind of where management wants to go and then how it can be interpreted best, not only in technology, but from his experience, is that really the best thing to do? Is he an advisor or is he a provider?
A little bit of both. And this is kind of, you bring up a really good point, which is essentially isn't really the big challenge guiding the organization through change, making the right decisions and guiding them through change. Yeah, I mean, but I would say that that's a key challenge for every executive. What I wanted to focus on is what's unique to the CIO office. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's getting in the way of the CIO is a long entrenched historical perspective around the role of IT, which is IT is plumbing, it's foundational to the business, and it's not innovative to the business. And I know that there's a lot of discussion at the C-level, there's a lot of discussion in industry press about technology drives innovation. We've been hearing this for years, but the reality is when you look at the spending reports, most recent one from Gartner, 29% of IT spend last year was for things that actually created innovation or drove increased profitability in the business, and the balance of 71% was to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
So if the vast amount of corporate America is spending money in IT like that, then it's going to be hard to meet these future-facing challenges. And if they are spending money like that, then either what we're saying is it's okay that 20% of our overall massive technology spend is really driving results and the other 79 just keeps the lights on, or we've got to look at something different. So that's the first, within the context of being the digital transformation officer, changing that mindset through better alignment with the business, going back to what you said about what benefits the business and guiding them in decisions, is key and critical to the CIO being that chief transformation officer.
Well, you were talking about plumbing. I mean, I can remember that in the day, it would have been a case of you either make me money or save me money. What are you here for? Which one are you mm-hmm. here for? And I think now it's a case where there's so much nuance. I guess that's probably the concern. I don't know about concern, but I think interesting from an outsider looking in to that particular role. Again, it goes back to what you were saying. I mean, the challenge of them being able to appreciate and understand the bottom line as a functional part of the process, obviously, as like a plumber or doing the utility work that keeps the business running. I mean, clearly, won't that be sort of a commodity, it's sort of an automated process that's almost assumed and built into the overall business plan anyway? And when you talk about a budget line item and making a determination of exactly where the money is going, is it kind of dangerous to see it under quote-unquote IT or under some general line item that might cover both the utility aspect and the innovation aspect? Because I'd be questioning in 10 years. Go ahead.
No, I think you make a good point, which is, if IT spend is so critical and the majority of IT spend is foundational, should maybe the innovation spend sit elsewhere, which is, you kind of got into the nut of the problem. Companies keep trying to solve the idea of technology innovation by moving it to different places. Mm. The CMO goes out and spends money in the cloud to get a new experience platform they didn't have before. The CAO goes to a cloud-hosted financial solution because their perception is IT can't move fast enough to deploy something different for them. Or they go to a cloud-based FP&A solution because it's just easier, more nimble. They can throw it in a credit card. Operations goes to a cloud-based plant management system. Mm-hmm. So clearly there's ways to get rid of the foundational spending. The problem is a lot of the neat digital stuff or the beneficial digital stuff is being permitted to go outside of the span of control of the CIO. Maybe permitted to is a strong word. Just the way the business is run, the CIO is looked at as a foundational keep the lights on resource, and people just go elsewhere. And could be that in some companies the CIO is not responsive and IT isn't responsive. It could be in some companies that they just don't spend effectively. Could be that they look at it as, OpEx, and really these other things, they don't have CapEx dollars to allocate, so OpEx is easier when you throw it in a credit card. There's lots of different explanations, but the reality is that the one person that can have the overall perspective of the firm and knows the most about technology needs to be sitting at the center of all of these decisions in order for the company to get the proper leverage on the technological investment. Because today, theoretically speaking, most of the infrastructure costs can be moved into the cloud, and what's left behind is routers and connections and laptops, even though to a certain extent that can be externalized as well. All that makes sense?
Oh no! Well, actually, the challenge became. Here's another aspect to it as well. I mean, we talk about rapid change, and it isn't in a silo. When we talk about change, it's ubiquitous, it's horizontal, blah blah blah. I'm fascinated by the, like how much responsibility can the CIO have, say, for results? And if results is not just performance of the technology, it's actually results on the impact of the goal. He better be in the center of the positioning, right? And does he really, or she, have the capability or the background to really participate in that conversation? I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just saying in the terms of what traditionally would have been accepted by a technologist.
Yeah, and that's an awfully good point. But so let's take something like AI as an example. So people believe AI is going to be beneficial to a firm, and they want to explore use cases for where they could use a combination of intelligent automation or cognitive systems or machine learning models or nascent AI like deep learning and neural network stuff in order to better drive a business result, right? Well, who are you going to go to make that evaluation? Would you go to the chief marketing officer? They're going to go immediately to a product, right? They're going to buy a vendor product. Are you going to go to the CFO? Yeah, you're probably going to get a very product-oriented point of view. The CIO, if you have the right CIO, is going to be able to take not only a broad-based business view, but understand the fundamental underlying technology. Are they going to be the best AI guy on the face of the planet? No. Yeah. But at least they have the foundational skill set necessary in order to be able to understand the issues. This would be no different than if the Financial Accounting Standards Board or the SEC put out a new regulatory reporting requirement on how you have to treat revenue recognition differently. You would go to your CFO to determine the impact. They might not be the world-leading expert at it, but they would get educated quickly and they would find the right people to guide them to the right decision.
Well, I tell you what, you're talking about some pretty fascinating dynamics because, you use things like the right CIO, and if he's educated and trained effectively, if she has the experience. I'm looking at probably a legacy culture as it relates to the evolution of how a lot of these executives get an opportunity to experience or educate themselves. I mean, how does an individual, I'm not even sure where they would be from, what they would be starting out as, but what would they have to do to educate or experience themselves in a legacy type of environment where they're not going to get an opportunity to have that kind of responsibility or leadership, but yet are going to need that experience in order to go up the career path?
Well, that's a pretty good question. Now we're starting to get into areas of how you manage personal development, but
well, I understand that.
But I mean, the CIO. Yeah, I was going to say is if you look at the CIO, right, and especially when you go back and you look at the white paper we wrote on new roles of digital transformation, we do make some specific recommendations of how the CIO can address this. One is setting, and some of this is basic leadership advice, but some of this, the first point is being very, very clear about your vision and be clear in your vision and worry less about the plan. Make sure people understand the vision for technology in the company and how it will be enabling force, as opposed to how you are going to do a phone system upgrade this year.
Yeah.
Look at enabling activities that allow you to move faster and more nimbly. Obviously, cloud's part of that. DevOps as part of actually a whole agile transformation of your software development and release cycle, including connection to DevOps, helps you move faster. That buckled together with modern data and integration architecture clears a lot of the SDLC roadblocks that consume so much time in your past. With respect specifically to digital transformation, make sure you are in the middle of those conversations, visibly sponsoring the change as opposed to roadblocking it. And that gives you the opportunity to perhaps update or improve skill sets you didn't have before, because then you are engaged in the conversation moving forward and learning on it as opposed to roadblocking it. And then lastly, no good leader is a good leader because they have poor people working for them. Good leaders are good leaders because they've been smart enough to develop very, very good leaders underneath them. So focusing on your people and helping them develop is a very important, if not core part of you being better at your job as CIO.
Well, and again, when you talk about human resource, career, development and that kind of thing, and I'm guessing, obviously that's not your boathouse, but the bottom line for me is if I'm encountering a client and that client doesn't have the experience or training, it's going to affect my ability to be able to succeed with that relationship, right? So I'm assuming that you got to be running into situations where, this, and it's a touchy subject. I mean, I'm not making a judgment. I mean, it's I guess a best guess under the circumstances. Because again, how many of the people that you're describing exist? I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point, but obviously you can't just arbitrarily think every person that responds to a CIO description or CIO title is going to come with that kind of capability. I mean, I've known a lot of CIOs over the years, and I'm a talker and I'm a marketer and I'm a selling guy, kind of thing. Normally, they're more analytical and they're a little, they're not great presenters necessarily, and where I'm going. I mean, how do they go in and advocate if they don't have that kind of leadership personality developed in, within their experience? And how do they get that experience when they're dealing with legacy situations?
Sure. So there's kind of two perspectives on this, right? There's the perspective of the company looking for a CIO and being clear about what they want and need, right? And I don't really think that's the point of your observation or question. So I'll just observe that if you're a company looking to recruit a senior leader of any kind, you better be pretty clear about what you're looking for and what stage of growth you're in. If you are a cash flow-based company, in other words, fairly steady margins, the point of the company is to maximize cash flow, then you're going to look for a particular kind of CFO, right? I'm going to compare this to other leaders. You're probably going to look for someone that's more operationally focused and is good with cost management. If you're a company in trouble because you're not selling enough, then you're going to look for an inspirational leader in the CISO office, in this case, Chief Sales Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, who is very, very good about activating aggressive sales teams. So same thing with the CIO. If you're going through a major digital transformation, you're probably going to CIO who has experience running agile software development teams integrated with DevOps cycles and continuous integration models, and has experience building and deploying digital. If, on the other hand, your business has already gone through a digital transformation and now you need to settle things down and calm them out because you had some challenges with it, you might go with a CIO that has better change management background and skills coupled with a technology background in order to, ease the transition into that model. So from the employer side, you've got to be clear about what you're looking for and why, as opposed to just looking for a technologist.
I think that's
technologist. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was getting to the opposite side of that. As a CIO embedded in a legacy environment for a number of years, how do you gain those skills? Look, technology changes rapidly. We all know that. And especially if we've been embedded in technology, we've been face-jammed with that particularly nasty little fact almost every single year in our career, which means we have to work harder to keep up. And especially when we've been in the career for a little while longer and we've settled into skill sets that have made us successful, it's very difficult to break out of the habits of going with what you know versus learning new stuff. But that's the life we chose, and that's what we have to do. I do approximately 20 hours a week of reading and continuing education in order to stay active in my chosen field. And in terms of presentation skills, look, if you're going to sit at the C level, you better know how to influence an audience. You better know how to convince people of a decision. You better be able to write a business case that's compelling and fits the strategy of the firm. If that's not what you can do, then maybe the CIO seat is not right for you, or maybe it's right, but you need to be in a slightly different organization. But a C-level officer in any major company has to have those skills, or they're really not a C-level officer.
I got to tell you, Dwight, we do a lot of interviews. We do a lot of discussions. I mentioned horizontal and vertical. We don't really work with anything vertically anymore. We work horizontally across the board. And a lot of times we'll say it's the same thing, only different. Supercomputers, AI. I mean, the industries and the products and the marketplaces obviously are dynamic, but usually the internal backup structure and infrastructure and planning and strategics, they kind of run the same. But my point being, though, is you brought up some things that I haven't really heard before. I mean, it may be obvious to you, but something as obvious as the CEO really starting the responsibility of finding the right CIO or CTO under the dynamics that you're describing. I mean, I would challenge the fact that even some of the existing CEOs are some fairly, obviously you start getting into the larger companies and the huge companies, that's not an issue, but, when you start talking about first-generation entrepreneurs or startup companies or early-stage, growth where they're mid-size, I'm going to be thinking that the CEO is probably a versatile generalist to begin with, and he probably might not even be aware, of the descriptions that you're talking about, or realizing, as you were saying that, I was thinking about Jobs, that saying about you don't know what you want until you see it. I think a lot of the CEOs really don't have a clue to a degree now, and I'm not judging all of them, to be able to say, this is the problem I have, and I'm looking for a guy like this or a woman like this to solve it. Let's do this. I'd like to hold on to that discussion for another time, because I actually think that's worthy of a little bit more depth, and I'll tell you why, and that is because I think in the long run what you guys are all about, and I think your reputation is validated by the performance, but if I think of North Highland, I think about doing the right thing for the right people at the right time. And clearly one of the messages I would say for the greater audience is the fact that it's not an easy decision. It's certainly obviously not going to be easy to be the CIO, but the reality of it is it's even a tough decision to find the right person under the circumstances that everything is changing. So even the business and the marketplaces are changing. It's a wild and crazy time. But listen, I apologize. I'm running a little long. I got to tell you, Dwight, I'm fascinated by your responses. I can't tell you how informative it's been for me. And again, you have a tendency to hear, a lot of hyperbole and the same issues over and over and over again. I think you brought some interesting spotlights to things that we hadn't thought about before. Thanks a lot for taking time. When you put in 20 hours in a week trying to get yourself educated, and the rest of the time, knowing a guy like you, you're probably putting in another 60 hours a week working. I'm thinking, thank you for taking time out of, I know, a crazy schedule to join us for a couple of minutes today.
My pleasure. North Highland makes it easy to love your job. If anyone wants to follow up with me, I can always be reached at Dwight.Specht@NorthHighland.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, as one would expect, and my profile is at Dwight Specht on both LinkedIn and on Twitter.